Hi, this is Nuri at the Storyteller's Corner, and today we're going to be reading more Betsy and Tacy. This is Chapter 5, The First Day of School. When September came, Betsy and Tacy started going to school. Julia took Betsy, and Katie took Tacy on the opening day. Betsy's mother came out onto the steps of the little yellow house to wave goodbye, and Tacy's mother came out on her steps too, along with Tacy's brother Paul and Bee the baby, who weren't old enough to go to school yet. Betsy was beaming all round her rosy face. Her tightly braided pigtails with new red ribbons on the ends stuck out behind her ears. She wore a new plaid dress which her mother had made, and new shoes which felt stiff and queer. Tacy's mother had brushed the ringlets over her finger till they shone. They hung neat as sausages down Tacy's back. Tacy had a new dress too. Navy blue it was, because she had red hair. But where Betsy was beaming, Tacy was frowning. She held her head down and dragged from Katie's hand. She was bashful, that was the trouble. Betsy had almost forgotten how bashful Tacy could be. Tacy wasn't bashful with Betsy anymore, but she was very bashful starting school. "She'll get over it," said Katie, and they set off down Hill Street. The maples were beginning to turn yellow, but the air was soft and warm. It smelled of the smoke from Grandpa Williams's bonfire. "We're going to school, Grandpa Williams!" shouted Betsy. "That's fine," said Grandpa Williams. Tacy said nothing. They went down Hill Street to a vacant lot. It was knee-deep with goldenrod and asters. It would have been fun to stop and play there if they hadn't been going to school. But they cut through a little path and came out onto Pleasant Street. On the corner, on a big green lawn, stood a chocolate-colored house. It had porches all around it, and a tower on the side, and a pane of colored glass over the front door. It was a beautiful house, but they had no time to look at it. They were busy going to school. They crossed the street and turned the corner and came to a little store. "That's Miss Chubbuck's store," Julia explained. "That's where you buy gumdrops and chocolate men if anyone's given you a penny." "I wish someone had given me a penny, don't you, Tacy?" Betsy asked. Tacy didn't answer. Just beyond Miss Chubbuck's store, they came to the schoolyard. They came first to the boys' yard, a big sandy yard with one tree. On the other side of the schoolhouse was the girls' yard, which looked much the same. But the girls' yard had more trees. The schoolhouse was built of red brick, trimmed with yellow stone. A steep flight of steps led up to the door. At the top of the steps stood a boy holding a bell. When he rang that bell, Julia explained, it was time for school to begin. Oh, I wish I could be the one to ring the bell, don't you, Tacy? Tacy didn't say a word. The girls playing in the schoolyard came crowding around Julia and Katie to see their little sisters. Tacy shook her long red curls over her face. Between the curls, her face was as red as a beet, and she wouldn't look up. She didn't look up until the boy at the head of the steps began to ring the bell. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, went the bell. Casey jumped like a scared rabbit and pulled Katie's hand. She pulled away from the schoolhouse because she didn't want to go in. But Katie was stronger than Tacy, and besides, she was the kind of person who never gave up. So she pulled harder than Tacy and got her to the baby room door. Julia had already taken Betsy to the door, and she had said to Miss Dalton, the teacher, "This is my little sister, Betsy." Now Katie said, "This is my little sister, Tacy," and added, "She's very bashful." "Never mind," said Miss Dalton, smiling brightly. "I'll take care of that. I'll put her right by me." And she placed a little chair beside her desk and put Tacy into that. Tacy did not like it. Betsy could tell from the way that she scrunched down and hid herself beneath her curls. She liked it less than ever when Betsy was put far away at a regular desk in one of the rows of desks that filled the room. But Miss Dalton was too busy to notice. Julia and Katie went out, the door closed, and school began. If it hadn't been for Tacy looking so forlorn, Betsy would have liked school. The windows were hung with chains made from shiny paper. On the blackboard was a calendar for the month of September, drawn with colored chalk. And Miss Dalton was pretty. She looked like a canary, but it was hard for Betsy to be happy with Tacy, such a picture of woe. Instead of looking better, Tacy looked worse and worse. She gazed at Betsy with pleading eyes, and her face was screwed up like she was going to cry. "She's gonna cry," somebody whispered in Betsy's ear. It was a little boy named Tom. "Oh," cried Betsy, "you've got your teeth." She knew because now he said S as well as she did. Besides, she could see them, 2 brand new teeth right in front of his mouth. "Yes, I got them young," said Tom. He sat at the desk behind Betsy's. Betsy was glad when recess time came. They formed 2 lines and marched out of the room and through the front door and down the stairs. The girls skipped off to the playground at the left. The boys to the one on the right. Now, thought Betsy, she would find Tacy and tell her not to be bashful. But when she looked around for Tacy, Tacy was nowhere to be seen. Betsy ran to the sidewalk and looked down the street. Flying red ringlets and twinkling thin black legs were almost out of sight. "Stop, Tacy, stop!" cried Betsy. She ran in pursuit, but it was no use. Tacy could always run faster than Betsy. She ran faster now. At last, however, she slowed down so that Betsy could catch up. They had reached Miss Chubbuck's store. "Tacy!" cried Betsy. "We're not supposed to leave the yard." "I'm going home," said Tacy. She was crying. "But you can't. It's not allowed." Tacy only cried. She cried harder than Betsy had ever seen her cry. She wrinkled up her little freckled face. Tears ran over her cheeks and dropped into her mouth and spotted the blue navy dress. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, went the schoolhouse bell. It meant that recess time was over. "Come on, Tacy, we've got to go back." Tacy cried harder than ever. The lines of marching children vanished into the schoolhouse. A strange calm settled upon the empty yard. From an open window came the sound of children singing. "We're supposed to be in there," Betsy said. She felt a queer, frightened lump inside. "You go back if you want to," said Tacy between sobs. I won't go back without you," said Betsy. She sat down miserably on Mrs. Chubbuck's steps. The door of the little store opened and Mrs. Chubbuck came out. She was large and stout, with a small, soft mustache. She leaned on a cane when she walked. "What's this? What's this?" she asked. "Why aren't you in school?" said Betsy. Her lip trembled. "Aren't you supposed to be in school?" "Yes, we are, but she's bashful." "Runaways, eh?" said Mrs. Chubbuck. At the sound of the dread word, Betsy's eyes filled with tears. That was exactly what they were. Runaways. That was a terrible thing to be. How could she go home from school and tell her mama? Would they ever be allowed to go to school again? Betsy began to cry. Once started, Betsy cried as hard as Tacy. Harder, perhaps. And when Tacy heard Betsy cry, she took a fresh start. They held each other tight and wailed. Now, said Mrs. Chubbuck. And she limped back into her store. When she came out, she opened her hands, and each of them held a little chocolate man. "Do you eat the head first or the legs first?" Mrs. Chubbuck asked. Betsy ate the head first, and Tacy ate the legs first. They couldn't very well eat and cry together, so they were eating, not crying, when they saw Miss Dalton hurrying across the schoolhouse yard. The sun was shining on her canary-colored hair. She looked pretty but very worried. "Oh, there you are," she cried gladly when she saw them. "You weren't supposed to go home, my dears. That was only recess." The tears began to trickle again. "I know," said Betsy, "but Tacy doesn't like school. She's bashful." "And she won't go if I won't," said Tacy. "Nope, I won't go if she won't," said Betsy. They lifted anxious faces, smeared with chocolate and tears. Miss Dalton stooped down and put an arm around each of them. She smiled up at Mrs. Chubbuck. "Tacy," she said, "how would you like to sit with Betsy, right in the same seat?" So they went back to school. Tacy sat with Betsy, right in the same seat. They were crowded, but no more so than they were in the piano box. The little boy named Tom sat right behind them. And after that, Tacy liked school. Betsy had liked it all the time. The end. I hope you've enjoyed Chapter 5. And I was wondering, as I read, if there is anything that chapter makes you think of where you may have had a hard time or you were with somebody who had a really hard time. And somehow, some way it managed to work out all on its own. Maybe some nice people like Mrs. Chubbuck and Miss Dalton were helpful and made suggestions about what you could do. If you have any stories like that, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will see you next week with Chapter 6. Bye-bye.